So I want to talk to you about how to make really good visual presentations to engage your audience and to not kill them with your PowerPoint, okay? All right, so why use visuals? First of all, there's different kinds of learners, right? Some people are visual learners, some are auditory learners, and some are kinesthetic learners. So kinesthetic is I got to touch it. I got to touch it to learn it. Auditory learners is I got to hear it, and visual learners is I got to see it. So just be aware that your audiences are going to have different learning styles. Plus, people remember visuals, okay? People remember visuals. You all know this saying, a picture's worth 1,000 words. Boy, that's so true, right? I could spend all day trying to describe this picture, and it's not the same as looking at it. So I just read the other day, somebody said about art and myth and poetry that art expresses the inexpressible. That's why a picture can be worth 1,000 words. There can just be so much there. And a lot of times words let us down. So what is your goal when you use visuals? It's not to impress. It's not to perform. It's not to show that you know how to use PowerPoint really well. It's to be an effective communicator. And you really want to engage that audience and make that connection, that human connection with people. And a lot of times visuals can really help you do that. So I'm hoping that as you see this, you will kind of rethink your projects a little bit and think, how can I make this super visual? Okay, so this is a preview of my main points. This is what we're going to talk about. Communication and visuals, how to think that way. Start thinking visually. How to access available tools. So there's different software out there. There's templates. There's little tricks of the trade and that kind of thing. We'll consider what to avoid. We'll even watch a video about how not to kill your audience with PowerPoint. Implementing effective design principles. Certain principles that can make or break anything, right, that are on a visually speaking. How to embed your video. It's super easy. You want to do that. And then using other visuals. Lee Iacocca, who was the head of Chrysler, said this: you can have brilliant ideas, but if you can't get them across, your ideas won't get you anywhere. Boy, how true that is, huh? Steve Jobs said this, which is ironic. He said, people who know what they're talking about don't need PowerPoint. His company came up with Keynote, which is kind of like PowerPoint. It's very similar. And Steve Jobs did use visuals when he would unveil new products, didn't he? He always did. And then he would have things in his hand as well. So he knew how to use them effectively. He certainly didn't have a lot of bullet points, did he? Albert Einstein said, if you can't explain it simply, you don't understand it well enough. That's where sometimes we run into problems when we go to write a paper. We haven't sufficiently digested the material in order to be able to regurgitate it. And so we run into problems. And it's the same thing. Being a good, effective communicator, whether it's teaching or writing a paper or an article, the key is to take complex ideas and simplify them and streamline them to make them palatable for the audience so they can wrap their heads around it. Okay, so I want to get you thinking visually, okay? Emphasis on the word visual presentation. There are different philosophies out there, and one of them that's there is, it's called Presentation Zen, and it's by an American guy who lives in Japan, and he's written a book called Presentation Zen, and there's also a website, presentationzen.com. So what he was inspired by the simplicity of a Japanese box lunch. So you can look at this image and see how simple it is. It's just really laid out, it's clean. It's not cluttered. There's not a bunch of stuff there that doesn't need to be there. That was his inspiration. And so that's his driving force for the stuff that he offers. And I do recommend having a look at his book and his website. It's good stuff. Another trend right now is going toward nonlinear presentations. So we have things like Prezi, which I'll talk about in a little bit. Prezi is an online software. You can go to Prezi, Prezi.com. As a student with an .edu email address, you can use it for free, a limited version, but you can use it for free. Going wordless, that is a big trend right now, is going toward having minimal words or no words at all. So you can imagine that if I was talking about conflict, I could just put this image up and talk about conflict. Because it's like, oh, wow, yeah, I've felt like that before. We make this emotional connection to images that we don't always make with words. Using graphical representations, graphs, charts, that kind of thing. Whenever you're using a lot of statistical data, numbers especially, it's better to show them visually, compare and contrast dates or genders or whatever you're doing. To show it visually can be very, very helpful. So what's my philosophy? I know you're dying to know. Mine is to use good design principles, to be very visual and to use good design principles. Another tool is to use personal stories. So remember we talked about last time, people love stories, they love testimonies, they love anecdotes. So, you know, families come together in different ways. A lot of us have blended families. So I use this one image to talk about blended families and how families can look different today. And it just helps to show one picture and tell a story. Use enough words to help audiences get key concepts. Embed your videos. There's some websites that you can go to download, and you just put in the URL of the video and it downloads it. I've used those. I really like the plugin that goes with Firefox. It seems to work better than when I use Safari, which is my normal browser. But Firefox has different downloaders. And then when you actually go to the YouTube website, you see the image, right? The video image window. And then underneath, it'll say download. And you click on that, and it'll actually give you options to download it in different formats. And the quality, you can adjust the quality. So what you do is you download those, and then it's just as easy as picking it up and dragging it into your PowerPoint presentation. Super easy. You guys know how to get between programs on your computer, right? So if I do it, I can show you here. See, I can just go between all my stuff that's open. It's super easy. Learn shortcut keys because they will really, really help you out. If you're switching from your presentation to YouTube, then first of all, it's disruptive to do that, right? And the other thing is that, what if the internet's down? Or, you know, you got to think, Murphy's Law, right? The other thing is, sometimes you sit there waiting for it to buffer, and that's a real drag. Just make sure that they're downloaded and they're already in your presentation. You want to also format your images. So here you have an example on the left of an image that I got from Google. And then on the right is I've taken out the background. And it makes it look way better, right? Right. So on a PC or on PowerPoint, I believe it's called Format Images and then Transparency. And then on Keynote, which is the Apple equivalent of PowerPoint, it's called Instant Alpha. I click on Instant Alpha, and then you highlight the color that you want to take out, and it's just that easy to take it out. And it makes your images look so much better. Use humor. So this is a picture that I use when I talk in my interpersonal class about context and how a lot of times what something means is very dependent on the context. And so a pat on the bottom is very acceptable on the sports field, but if guys are in suits and they're in the boardroom, it kind of has a different connotation. So situational things, right? But humor, people like humor, right? We like to be entertained, we like to laugh. Okay, so I'm going to talk to you about design principles. They're called the CRAP principles, so we're going to talk CRAP for a few minutes. All right, the first of the CRAP principles is contrast. Contrast. So, look at this image. Is that a high contrast or a low contrast image? Low. That is a low contrast image. Why? There's not a lot of variation. Yeah, not a lot of variation. It was because it was a foggy, smoggy day, right? It was an overcast day, so that tends to really dampen the contrast. So you have here where the foreground, the middle ground, and the background are almost indecipherable, right? Now, we tend to read images from left to right, just like we read words left to right. All the aesthetics change when you go to like the Middle East where they have Arabic and they read from right to left. Your eye lands on the brightest thing in the picture, and we also tend to read from left to right. So definitely your eye lands on the Chrysler Building, right? But this is not a high contrast image. So it's not the kind of images that we would necessarily want to use in a presentation. Compare that with this. That is good contrast, right? That bird really pops from the background. This flower really pops from the background. And of course, black and white are the ultimate high contrast colors. You want to avoid low contrast. So I've seen a lot of this where somebody will have like a pale green background with pale blue letters on it, and it just doesn't work. It's hard to see. The only reason you can see these well at all right now is because there's a shadow on there. And if the shadow wasn't there, they'd be even worse. But that's hard to read. So try to keep your contrast high when you're thinking about your images and you're thinking about your background and your letters. Second one, repetition. We like repetition. So here we have circles, and they're different colors, they're different sizes, but it totally works, right? Right. This is one of the most common shapes in the universe, right? Yes. We see galaxies shaped like this. We see seashells, ferns, all kinds of stuff. There's a whole mathematical deal that's with this, right? So here you have repetition of something, and it draws you in. It's like it's interesting. I love this image because it's not only repetition of the fingers, but it's hugely high contrast. And then notice what they did with the words, making jungle fever 2 different colors so that they would really pop in order to keep that contrast going. So that's really, really strong image there. Okay, the third one. What were the first 2? Contrast. Repetition. Okay, so now alignment. How do you line things up? So we have this expression, get your ducks in a row. Well, you can arrange your ducks in lots of ways, right? But how you arrange your ducks, or how you arrange anything, is important. So you'll notice that on here I have these 3 boxes are same size. There's equal distance between them. They're laid out in a way that makes sense, and we read it from left to right. Contrast that with this. When we're haphazard in terms of where we place things, it doesn't work. There's no flow to it. And so on here, your eye tends to go like this, and then your eye ends up in a place where there's nothing. You don't want your audience members to be led into nowhere. Dark rooms with nothing in them, right? We have to tell people where to look. So that's haphazard. This makes sense. Where you place stuff, how you line things up. Okay, and the last one. So we've had contrast, repetition, alignment. The fourth one is proximity. What is proximity?
The distance between things.
Yeah, the distance between things and the relationship of things to each other, right? So you will see this image. Good contrast, repetition for sure. Everything's touching.
Yes.
And what if one of those circles wasn't touching?
It would draw your eye.
It would draw your eye, because it would be the exception, right? So if that was your point, you use proximity to help make your point. So if we were trying to say, okay, Campbell's is different than all the rest of these companies, then we might make it separate. But unless there's a reason to do that, you don't do it. You always have to have a reason for the things you do, right? Everything is deliberate. What stands out here? The white sheep. It's where it's placed. That tells a story, whereas if it was just black sheep on one side, white sheep on the other, it would be a completely different image, wouldn't it? Now, this is one of my favorite print ads.
That's so funny.
So Corona. So we have the 3 bottles. So we have repetition, right? First of all, we have contrast. We have yellow in the bottles and it's in nowhere else in the picture. So we have a high contrast. We have repetition, bottle, 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 slice, slice, whole one, oh, and then your eye lands on greedy, right? Alignment. Notice how they're all lined up in a row. If they were just haphazardly put on the table, that wouldn't make sense. You wouldn't know, like, it wouldn't have this flow to it. The whole point of this is moving toward, you know what? There's something like really satisfying about what I get here, right? Equal space between them, pretty much. Shadows are consistent. That's a good point. Right. So that image just really works, right? So then I was like, okay, I want to put the word proximity here on the same slide. So how do I do that? Well, I can try it in different places. Let's see how it works. It's kind of floating around, right? Oh, that totally doesn't work, right? If I have it on the left, it's completely separate from the image. And there's all this dead space in between. So I can keep moving it around, trying different things. There it's lined up with the top. There, it's lined up with a strong line in the table. But you know what? I ended up with it there, and I really like it there because it becomes all one piece. So where you place stuff really does matter. So, contrast, repetition, alignment, and proximity. They're just really simple words, but it's a great acronym, and it's probably one you're going to remember. Okay, so we've talked crap today. So when you go home tonight, family says, "What'd you do in school today?" You're like, "Teacher talked about crap." Right. Typefaces. Fonts matter, right? You use a font to help tell your story. So you guys know what serifs are? Serif fonts have these little feet on them, right? These little extra guys. Those are serifs. Sans serif fonts do not have them. They're just plain Jane. So we get a different feel from these, right? First of all, these are easier to read, right? If you're doing something like a history presentation, you're going to go with something traditional, something sort of old school. Whereas if you're doing something about trends, you're probably going to want to have a more contemporary feel, so you would go more with a sans serif font. How big do you make your fonts? Well, it depends. So you got to think about, where am I going to give this presentation? How big is the image going to be that people are going to be looking at? So if we had an image this big, this works in this classroom, right? Yeah. But if you were presenting at the Pikes Peak Center and you knew that you were only going to have a screen this big, the people in the back row are not going to see hardly anything, right? You're going to want to make stuff really big. In fact, for that kind of situation, you probably not even want to have too many words. You want to have really big images, right? In this classroom, you know, a lot's going to work, but you don't want to get too small. That's going to be pushing it. That 18 points going to be pushing it in this room. Back in the olden days, we used to have television sets. Remember, like in school, they'd have one in the corner, those CRT televisions? Oh yeah, they'd roll them in on that cart, the AV cart, right? It was a much smaller image. You know, now projectors are really popular, and we have them in a lot of places, which is awesome. But I still run into situations where I go teach in different parts of the world where they don't necessarily have the latest and greatest technology. And so you have to just be aware of those things when you think about it. Now, when you're sitting at your computer designing your presentation, you're like 15, 20 inches from your screen. It's like it all looks great to you, right? Like you can read 8-point type. But if you project that, you have to think, what's it going to be like for the audience? So you have to step back in a sense. You almost have to like step away from your computer and think, how is my audience going to see this? And you may have to be halfway across the room from your computer screen in order to get a sense of what size it's going to be for your audience. And back to the font issue, in terms of choosing your fonts, you don't want to go with more than 2 or 3 fonts on a page or even in a presentation. You choose a style and you stick with it. So you will see this if you see ads, you'll see magazines, websites, ones that are designed well, limit the number of fonts that they use. And often they will use one size font and one particular font for headings and maybe another style of font and a different size for other points, for like the body or the bullets or whatever. Color. We like color, don't we? I'm so glad we don't live in a black and white world. I mean, black and white's great for film noir, but, you know, outside of that. And Ansel Adams. So use color. I really encourage you to use color. Don't overdo it, but strategically place color is awesome. Use videos. So you definitely want to download those. Always embed them. Bring them straight into your presentations. Make sure that they're in the folder with your stuff. So say, for example, you're going to give a presentation using a computer that's not yours. You need to make sure that they're in the folder on your thumb drive, because when you put a video into your PowerPoint, it's actually referencing it from a different part of your computer. Same thing with fonts. The normal fonts are probably going to be, you know, Times New Roman and Helvetica, and all these are on like every computer. But if you're a font junkie and you're using some really cool, funky font you found somewhere else, you have to make sure that that's also in the folder with your presentation so that everything is there. The rule of thirds is basically whenever you have an image and you draw imaginary lines, 2 imaginary lines horizontal and 2 vertical, equally spaced apart, that the places where those lines intersect are the strongest places to place objects. So you see here that the boat and the island are both near an intersection of the lines. Here's another example. A lot of times even they'll put the eyes on those, right? Here's another example. So using the rule of thirds can be really, really helpful in terms of not only when you take images, but when you use them. All right, we're going to watch a little video.
There's some things I hate about PowerPoint, and I figure it's kind of my duty to point them out. So here we go. Here's common PowerPoint mistakes. Number 1, people tend to put every word they are going to say on their PowerPoint slides. Although this eliminates the need to memorize your talk, ultimately this makes your slides crowded, wordy, and boring. You will lose your audience's attention before you even reach the bottom of your first slide. Please don't do that anymore, please. Number 2, most common. Many people do not run spell check. Big mistake. Nothing makes you look stupider than spelling errors. If it's got a red line under it, recheck the spelling. And then finally, I hate this. Avoid excessive bullet pointing, only key points. Too many bullet points, and your key messages will not stand out. In fact, the term bullet point comes from people firing guns at annoying presenters. Hence the bullet point. Bad color schemes, not good. Clashing background and font colors can lead to distraction, confusion, headache, nausea, vomiting, and loss of bladder control. I can't stay on that one too long. Here's something I've noticed. The number of PowerPoint slides you have in your talk, the less useful your talk actually is. Unfortunately, my presentation is right there. I've also noticed this. People love to pack data into their presentations. They shove more and more data thinking it's better, but it's not. The more data you have, the harder it is to read your slide, and the effectiveness plummets. Now you can improve the effectiveness by adding some shading and some 3D effects and then some second order and third order effects, and then, I know, let's add some labels. That'll help a lot. And that's pretty much every marketing slide I've ever seen right there. Yeah. Then some like VP of marketing standing there going, it's real clear in Q4. What the hell are you talking about? Now, I'm into in animation. People become animators in PowerPoint. You can have things flying all over the place, and that can be good. If you're a visual learner, that will improve the effectiveness of your performance. But if you're easily distracted, more animations, and people have no idea what you're talking about. They're just, wow, that is cool, wow. And there's regions here, by the way. There's the simple but effective region. There's the active but confusing, the effective but boring, the active but ineffective, the dull but static region, the busy but useless, the ADD only region, the useful but amusing, the stupid but confusing, the dull triangle, the hyper triangle, the sleepy square, the dizzying pentagon, and everything else I just call pointless motion. That slide right there took me an hour and a half to make, right there. PowerPoint can just suck the life out of you. It's amazing. I've also come up with this. It's a kind of a little science I've invented called font analysis. Basically, the font you choose says something about who you are as a person. There's a huge list of fonts, and you choose one, and that says something about you. So be careful the font you choose. For example, if you choose Courier New, it happens to be my favorite, you're probably organized and structured. If you choose Matisse, it means you're artistic. And if you choose Times New Roman, it means you're lazy, apathetic, and unimaginative, and you always use the default. Oh.
Okay, so here are a few things to avoid. Some of the things that he talked about in the video, obviously. Standing in front of the projector, bad idea. So you got to think about where you're going to stand. Too much text, bad idea. People just shut down when they see too much text, right? It's the same thing on a billboard or a website or a magazine. If there's too much text, you shut down. You don't want to read any of it. So that's why we need white space. You know what? You can pack a lot in there, but if nobody reads any of it, then you've lost the battle. So plus text on visual presentations is really not that great anyway. Too much information. There's no way anybody could read this slide, right? If you're having some engineering conference and you needed to like zoom in on different parts of it, that might be more effective. But to just put something up like that really, really doesn't work. So limit your bullets. So here's the deal, guys. You can use bullet points if you use them wisely, as few words as possible. And here's what you do. Watch this. You reveal them as you talk about them, okay? So if you've got a slide that's got 3 or 4 bullet points on it, don't put them all up at once because your audience doesn't know what to look at. You have to guide your audience. You use your visuals just like you use your words to draw your audience along and show them what to look at and what to think about at the present time. So you reveal those bullets as you refer to them. Software options. So we all know about PowerPoint. PowerPoint has become the generic word like Kleenex. We don't mean necessarily Kleenex. Personally, I'm a Puffs girl. PowerPoint is used synonymously with visual presentations. We want to make a distinction here. It's definitely a possibility. Google Slides is another one. The advantage of Google Slides is that it all resides in the cloud, and it's good for teamwork because different people can work on it and see it. So it's a good collaborative environment to work. And then, of course, for you Mac users, Keynote is awesome. Keynote is the one that Apple sells for its products, and it's similar to PowerPoint, but I think it's more simplified, it's way more user-friendly, and it's got some nice little things about it. All right, I want to show you a little bit about Prezi. So Prezi, if you go to Prezi.com, this is software that lives in the cloud, and you can get free limited access by using a .edu email address. Otherwise, you've got to pay, okay? It's a different kind of concept. In PowerPoint, we talk about slides, and that's a leftover from the days where we had slide projectors. Do you guys remember slide projectors?
Yes.
Where they would actually have these little things, right? They were little 2-inch images, and they were a positive instead of a negative, and they'd have cardboard around them or plastic, and you'd shine light through them. And you'd put them in a projector, and it was very chunky, very clunky. You would go from one slide to the next slide to the next slide, so it was very linear. Prezi breaks up that style by making it very nonlinear, so you can do lots of zooming and panning. So say, for example, you were talking about a forest. You might start with a big picture of a forest, and then you zoom into one particular tree. And then you might pan over to another tree. Then you might zoom out and zoom in on an ant. So it becomes a whole different thing. Now, you can do some of this with some of the other softwares like Keynote and PowerPoint by using transitions, transitioning images in and out, page turns, doing different things between slides. You can make stuff feel a lot more interactive and a lot kind of sexier. I'm sorry, I'm looking for another word here.
Polished.
Polished, yeah. You can make things look less linear and a little bit more polished by using some transitions. You got to limit your number of transitions because if you use too many of them, you draw too much attention to your transitions and away from your content, and you don't want to do that. Okay, so here is about Prezi.
Being natural on stage is, to me, the gift of being a great speaker.
Great storytellers, they connect with you.
It's not about delivering information, it's about inspiring.
For me, Prezi is almost like the ability to be a rebel and an artist.
This is just one of those technologies that breaks away from the old mold. Slides can get a little routine.
You shoot 3 slides forward, 2 slides back, and before you know it, the audience is lost.
To me, Prezi feels like a playground. It's really having the freedom to express yourself and not being bound by a very linear path.
I don't think linearly. Most of us don't. Most of us have ideas that jump at us from different places, and then we sort of dive deeper, and then we sort of come back. And that's what Prezi does.
What really inspires me is that moment where the person that I'm teaching starts seeing things in a different way. That's what Prezi allows me to do.
The switch over to Prezi was ridiculously easy. Prezi allows me to do what comes natural to me.
I think it really changes how meetings are done.
I naturally like trying new things, and that's what Prezi allows you. You might see connections that you might not otherwise see.
But it's actually an idea generator. I've actually found that some of my best ideas get better by using Prezi.
People are actually getting engaged. They get up out of their chair, and once they get out of the chair, they start pointing at the screen.
It's also visually more beautiful.
I'm not an artist, but it really does feel like you can create an idea on the canvas and be able to present it in a way that's almost artistic.
I can't wait, to see what I am going to come up with, because I know it's going to be great. I know it's going to be different.
Okay, another thing you can do is find new templates. So there's a certain amount of templates that come with software. There's a lot of other free stuff out there. This is a website. Presenter Media is a paid service, but they have PowerPoint templates, Keynote templates, they have animations, clip art, video backgrounds. They have lots of cool stuff. It's a subscription-based thing. It's X number of dollars per year. I think it's like $69 a year or something like that. There are different levels, so you can get a month, you can get 3 months, that kind of thing. But it's kind of cool. I have a friend who uses it a lot. She teaches college, and she just thinks it's awesome. So it's another way of making your presentations kind of stand out and be a bit more entertaining and engaging. So presentermedia.com. You can use other visuals, props. Props are good, right? Sometimes costumes. So when I teach on intercultural communication, I often wear my African dress or something like that. It just reinforces what you're talking about, right? Dress can be another way that you communicate visually. So the big trends right now seem to be going toward lots of visuals, fewer words, using full screen images like this, which can be great. It is trendy, but I think it can often be very effective. And then make sure, of course, when you use images, that you use images that are big enough resolution. So you can see on this volunteer slide, it's actually a bit pixelated because it's a smaller image that I enlarged for this slide, and so it may not work as well. Play with things like contrast, like you can take an image and you can pull down the contrast on certain images so that they don't compete with the background as much. Like I could take this image right here, I could go way down on the opacity and give it a whole different feel. And a lot of times that can be really helpful when you're putting text over it, especially if you're doing like bullets, so it's not competing as much. All right, so I only expect simple perfection. So try to make your presentations as visually engaging as you can, limit your number of words. And one trick that you can do is you can actually split your screen so that you have one thing going up for the audience to see, but on your screen you have the current slide plus the next slide, so you can see what's coming, and then you've got a place for presenter notes underneath, and also a timekeeper. That can be very, very helpful. Okay, thank you.